let me discuss some of the politics of Iraq, the identity politics of Iraq, because I think that is the way that we can come around to the question of why is Iraq being discussed in a symposium on self-determination, because I think, in fact, it is very appropriate today to be discussing Iraq in the context of self-determination. Iraq, like every country, has identity politics. Now, Iraq, they don't have blue provinces and red provinces. Alas, they don't even have a Tea Party movement. They have Arab Sunnis, they have Arab Shia, and they have Kurds. Now, I say Arab Sunni and Arab Shia because actually the Kurds are mainly Sunni. So you shouldn't say it's about Shia, Sunni, and Kurds because the Kurds are Sunni. In fact, the Kurds also have some Shia as well. So the way politics have developed in Iraq is people see themselves as Shia, as Arab Shia, they see themselves as Arab Sunni, and they see themselves as Kurds. Would it be better if Iraq were red and blue provinces? I'll let you decide that, but I think one has to kind of accept what the politics are and not think that you can change people's identity from, to be Democrats versus Republicans or something else. Maybe that will come in Iraq, but right now it's Arab Sunni, Arab Shia, and Kurds. So what has happened in Iraq is you have a majority or a plurality of Shia. And the Shia, having been not the governing class, but the governed class by the Sunni, in the context of democracy, in the context of a one-person, one-vote democracy, the Shia have emerged as running the government. And by running the government, they have the main position being the prime ministership. But I think everyone in Iraq understands that Iraq cannot be run by one of these, as they say, components, that Iraq needs others as well. Iraq needs to have, in their leadership positions, where you have a prime ministership who runs the government, and by the way, constitutionally is required to run the security services. And certainly we can talk about whether whether Prime Minister Maliki has exceeded his authority there, but he has authority there. He has authority to run the security services. But in addition to the prime ministership, a powerful prime ministership, you also have a presidency. You have a three-member presidency, which until now has had the right to veto legislation coming out of the Council of Representatives, legislation which is always proposed by the government, by the prime minister. And so in addition to the prime ministership, the presidency, you also have a speaker of the Council of Representatives. So the trick for Iraq is to try to manage this situation so that all of these components, Kurds, Sunni, Shia, are all represented together in this. And this is indeed what has happened this week. It has taken a long time. It's been a painfully long time. And it is rather ironic to hear so many of the pundits, so many of the Western press say the fact that it has taken a long time is a testimony to the demise of America. And they try to put the Iraq politics as a function of our own lack of clout. Well, first of all, I'll make a couple of points. One, when you look at how they put together the government in 2006, and nobody in 2006 would have said the U.S. did not have a lot of clout in Iraq, it also took some 6 months. Secondly, I would say that to the extent there's been a demise in American clout in terms of Iraq's political system, it is more a function of the rise of or of consolidation of Iraq's political system that is causing America to have less say in Iraq's internal affairs. Now, I ask you, is that such a bad thing that it's going to be Iraqis determining their internal affairs rather than Americans? I think, frankly, it's a very positive development. And I think the fact that it was Iraqi politicians who came together. Masoud Barzani, the president of Kurdistan, was in Baghdad in the last week. He was in the room with Maliki and Alawi. At one point, Alawi just was so upset he started to walk out of the room. It was Barzani, the president of Kurdistan, who stood in the door and said, "Sit down, let's finish this job." These were all Iraqis and Kurds working together on this. And why is that such a bad thing? Why do we need Americans, whether General Petraeus or whoever, in there telling them what to do? We don't. We should be encouraging them to get through this. And if it takes them a few more months than we would have liked to take them, I don't think it's a bad thing at all. I think, to be sure, Iraq has a problem with outside influence. It has to show that it's standing up for itself and not just taking dictates from the Americans. But it has two other problems. Many, when you look at the American press on the subject of Iraq, you would think that Iran is behind every single issue in Iraq. In fact, Iraq is not a country that is heading toward more Iranian influence. Iraq's Shia do not need to be given lectures about the problem of dealing with Iran. I think it is instructive to go back to the 1980s to recall the fact that Saddam Hussein had an 8-year war with Iran with an army that was 80% Shia. And to suggest that the Shia of Iraq somehow want to be under or subservient to the Shia of Iran is really a complete misunderstanding of the history. It's a complete misunderstanding of the relationships. So why does this, I would call it myth, why does this myth persist? And there I would look over on the Sunni side. And what you see in the Arab world, if you look throughout the Arab world, every single Arab country is a Sunni-led country. Many of these countries have Shia minorities. In fact, one of these Sunni-led countries has a Shia majority. Bahrain is some 70% Shia. So you have an entire Sunni world, and by the way, that would include Turkey as well, who look not very carefully, but look at Iraq and see the fact that Iraq is consolidating a majority government, majority-led government. That is, in terms of Iraq's identity politics, that majority-led government is Shia. And if you're a Sunni from the rest of the Arab world, you look at Iraq and you see, wait, Iraq has always been Sunni-led. What's happened here? Why is it no longer Sunni-led? And so you say either one of two things. You say, well, it's because it's more democratic than we are. Or, more likely, you say, it's Shia-led because those stupid Americans have turned it over to Iran. Well, I would argue that's not a serious proposition for anyone who knows Iraq. Maliki, who is described in the American press today as somehow Iran's choice, Maliki, I'm here to tell you, Maliki was the last of Iran's choices. Iran did not want to see a Sunni restoration, to be sure. Iran did not want to see Iraq go back to Sunni-led government. Not that Iran gives a flying tackle about the quality of Iraq's democracy. That is probably the least on Iran's mind. But they do not want to see Iraq become Sunni-led as it was before, because from Iran's point of view, that is not in its national interest. So Iran supported various Shia leaders, none of whom has proved out. First, Iran said that what has to happen is all the Shia need to get together. Well, lo and behold, the Shia did not get together. So then Iran tried to champion some of the Shia leaders, including the Sadrists. Not that Iran and Muqtada al-Sadr have a particularly good relationship too. There again, we must resist the sort of comic book understandings of these relationships and really go into some of the details. And when you start looking at Muqtada al-Sadr, when you look at his relationships with the Ayatollahs in Qom, when you look at the relationships of the Ayatollahs in the Iranian holy city of Qom compared to the Iranian political leadership in Tehran, you can see a far more nuanced, far more complex picture emerging. So I would say the Iranians were not trying to pick winners, and the Iranians know better than the rest of us that the Dawa party, that is the new Dawa party under Maliki, is anything but an Iranian stooge. So the Iranians ended up supporting the idea that there should be Shia, but if you listen actually to the Iranian ambassador in Iraq, he made very clear that they want to see a government that does include all these components, that there should be Sunni representation, there should be Shia, there should be Kurdish representation as well. I think the problem of Iranian influence in Iraq, therefore, is not so much Iranian influence on the political system in Iraq, but rather Iranian malevolent influence in supporting various militia groups at the local level. These various militia groups are on a daily basis supplied by the Iranians with money and with weaponry. The Katyusha 107 millimeter rocket that found its way to my front yard, just 25 feet from my front door, was made in Iran. And when we looked at the serial number, it wasn't funny that night, I can tell you that, was made in Iran very recently. These were not old stockpiles of weapons, these were newly supplied weapons. Now, if you're Iranian official, you might say, look, we have nothing to do with that. I mean, you know, it's in a long border, thousands of kilometers. How in the world would you expect us to prevent every Katyusha 107 millimeter rocket from getting into Iraq? The fact of the matter is, Iran has never acknowledged there is even a problem, nor has Iran ever tried to police that border in a way that would prevent this weaponry from coming over. The failure to acknowledge that the problem exists, the failure ever to apprehend any people would lead one to the inexorable conclusion that Iran knows fully well that this is going on, and Iran has simply, for its own reasons, decided to allow this to continue in order to keep some relationships. So I think the issue of Iran in Iraq is something that we would all do well to study a lot better. We should understand there are historical reasons for Iran and Iraq. There are cultural reasons. When you look at the holy cities of Karbala and Najaf in Iraq, you see many thousands of Iranian tourists, religious tourists, coming there, visiting these holy sites. It is not for us to close this off. It is not for us to say this is a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. When you look at Iraqi small business people in places like Diyala, when you look at some of the economic relationships along the eastern side of Iraq, of course you see a lot of Iranian influence. This is also not a bad thing. So I think we need to have a far more nuanced view, a far better view, really, of the relationships there. I do believe, based on my reading or based on my relationships with Iraqi politicians, very few of them would ever want to be in a position of subservience to Iran political views. It's not to say the Iranians also don't try to influence the political system in Iraq with money. They do. But there, I would say the Iranians are not alone. And when you look over at money coming from Saudi Arabia, money coming from other parts of the Middle East to the various Sunni groups, you will see that the idea of a sort of great game, that is, that somehow as America begins to ramp down its troops, that somehow a great game has begun in Iraq. And this is something that I would hope the Sunni states and Iran and also Turkey would understand, that in the end of the day, Iraq will make its own future.